What's going on, wrestling fans? Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling's Hot Takes. Wait, I think it was Romy's Wrestling Hot Takes. Or maybe it was the Ol'NerdyBastards Wrestling's Hot Takes. We haven't landed on a name yet. We'll figure that out. Anyways, welcome back to another episode. We got a banger set up for you this week. And before we start, I just want to point out a couple of quick things, housekeeping things. Number one, you might hear a buzzing sound during the recording. That's because my building's running its, annual fire alarm testing. I'll try my best to edit that out, but if you do hear it, I do apologize. Some things are just out of my control. Second thing, I want to give a huge shout out to everybody that actually tuned in to our first episode last week. Thank you so much. Without you and your traction, we probably wouldn't have done another episode, but we got the momentum now. So we're really excited to take it up another notch and, bring you more content as we promised. But to the people that followed us and subscribed, thank you so much. We couldn't ask for more, but if you do enjoy this content and you'd like to continue supporting us, just hit the subscribe button, which will pop up right over here, hopefully. That depends on the edit, of course. But let's get into it without any further ado. Now, last week's episode was all focused on top 5 wrestlers that impacted my life and changed the way I perceive wrestling today. Well, today we're going to do something a little different. Like I mentioned before, we're not going to talk about what's going on the landscape of professional wrestling right now. Like, we know there's a lot of drama within WWE. Can we say Triple H and The Rock? TKO overstepping? Anyways, we won't get into that. Today's subject matter is actually one of, the things that I really wanted to cover for a really long time. And that's WWE matches that never happened. Some of the most incredible blockbuster matches we all wanted to see. Fire alarm. That never came to fruition. Things like Sting versus The Undertaker or Eddie Guerrero versus AJ Styles and some other ones I'm not going to give away just yet. But today I want to outline the top 5 interactions/wrestling matches I think should have happened a long time ago, but alas, they'll remain a dream forevermore. So without further ado, we'll jump right into it. And by the way, at the end, we'll do a couple of honorable mentions as well. To kick things right off, the first dream match that every single wrestling fan in the world wanted was The Undertaker versus Sting. They had so many opportunities to do this, and just think about how incredible this match would have been. Think about the WCW invasion angle that happened. That could have been an incredible opportunity to make this happen, right? We had American Badass Undertaker, and then we had Sting, who decided to stick to his contract and not sign one with WWE. And you can't blame him, because he had a guaranteed contract with WCW for the foreseeable future. Well, not the foreseeable future, but I think it was like a year or two long. So he could have just stayed home and collected checks, and really that's what Sting ended up doing. But just imagine what we could have had. 2 characters at their prime. The Undertaker, the phenom of the WWE. Stinger, I guess kind of like the phenom or the vigilante of WCW, right? And I'm talking about, obviously, Crow version of the Sting. Like, we don't need Surfer Stinger. Like, I'm pretty sure Surfer Stinger and Undertaker had an interaction in the early days of WCW. I'm not too sure, but we can look that up. But I'm talking about core Sting versus core Undertaker. Man, what an opportunity. It would have been incredible. You know what? Forget the WCW invasion angle in 2001. Take that out of the equation. We could have probably had it again when Sting debuted in 2015. Fire alarm. In 2015, Stinger came to the WWE, and we had the biggest opportunity to make that happen. Sure, they were both kind of out of their prime, but for fans, it was nostalgia, and we would have done anything to see that match happen. Instead, we got Sting versus Triple H at WrestleMania 31 with a brigade of an older D-Generation X and NWO came out, and well, let's try to forget that whole thing, But the point is, alas, a match that could have been generational, we missed out on. Just imagine the entrances, imagine the aura, imagine the darkness. And dare I say it, I think the winner should have been The Undertaker. But again, this is all up to the fans and their interpretation of who should have won. But what a missed opportunity. Talk about a dream match we could have had, or the dream match we could have had. Anyways, number 1 would be The Undertaker versus the Stinger. Let's move on to number 2. Number 2 for me is a technical prowess. 2 of the greatest technical wrestlers that ever stepped into the ring. And no, I'm not talking about who. I'm talking about Kurt Angle versus the best there was, the best there is, the best there ever will be, Bret the Hitman Hart. Now that would have been an incredible match. Just imagine at WrestleMania, an I Quit, a submission match, one or the other. But that would have been an incredible match, a technical feat. It would have been real wrestling, right? Like, the character work of Angle, and, Angle has done incredible work over his career. He could be a comedian, he could be serious and all that. He could carry the promos, okay? But just imagine the game inside the ring. Man, these two would have pushed each other to the limit. And I can only imagine ankle lock, sharpshooter, chokehold, this, that, sleeper. Like, I think about WrestleMania 10, Owen Hart versus Bret Hart, and the technical masterpiece that was. Just think about what Kurt and Bret could have done in the middle of a ring. My God. And by the way, if it were up to me, and depending on the era this would have happened, obviously being a fanboy of Bret, I would say Bret Hart. But, Perk Angle, by the way, he doesn't like being called that anymore. I should call him Peak Angle, is just a whole other beast altogether. Like, you got to keep in mind, Kurt Angle, he's got the technical prowess on the wrestling background, but he's also acrobatic and aerial, something that Bret never had. So it would have been a really good tie-up to see who would have won that. And truthfully speaking, if we're talking 2006 Kurt Angle, it's a wrap. Kurt's winning that one. Moving along to the next one. Now, this one is one that fans have been clamoring for years, to the point where one of the individuals in this, dream match at the Hall of Fame brought it up. In fact, what I'm talking about is The Rock versus HBK, Shawn Michaels. We're talking about Mr. Charisma versus Mr. WrestleMania. What about that would have been? Right? And if you go back to the 2008 Hall of Fame ceremony, The Rock actually talks about this. He brings up all the matches he could have had he stayed in WWE at that time instead of going to Hollywood. You could have had The Rock versus Rey Mysterio. You could have had The Rock versus HBK. And that's the one that every fan wants. Now, the shameful thing is that never really happened, and both of them were technically in their primes in the WWE still. And even when The Rock came back from Hollywood, he could have had the match. But due to some backstage politicking in the 90s, it never came to fruition. And let's be honest, Shawn caused a lot of issues in the 90s, and he wasn't in the best state of mind, one could say. He caused a lot of issues with Dwayne coming up in the industry, being, a third generation superstar, a Samoan with, the bloodline behind him. But the thing is, Shawn and DX were running the show, and Shawn was always in Vince's ears. So it really kind of left a bad taste for Dwayne. And they ribbed him a lot, and they pulled a lot of silly jokes on him. And there were some other instances where things got out of hand, which unfortunately led to them never having a match. In fact, there was a situation, I believe on SmackDown, where The Rock and Triple H were having a match, and Shawn Michaels was the officiant, the referee in the match, and he super kicked him. That was part of the angle, but apparently he kicked him a little too hard, and they had a backstage brawl about this later on. Now, I don't know how true that is. You know how reports are. But I wouldn't be too surprised by that. And in fact, on the TV show Young Rock, The Rock even has an episode dedicated to this subject matter. Now, he doesn't obviously say it's Shawn Michaels, and the character who portrays this character behind the scenes ends up being a black individual in the show. But we all know he was alluding to Shawn Michaels. Kind of crazy when you think about it, but it would have been incredible. Just imagine WrestleMania. Imagine the promos. Imagine the entrances. Imagine the theatrics in the match. And here's the thing. They're both known for their over-the-top selling. Like, that's what they're very good at. So, in my opinion, that's probably my number one dream match. But for a lot of fans, that is their go-to dream match that never happened. Moving along, another one that's a massive dream match that we almost had a couple of times, actually, but it never came to fruition. And I'm talking about CM Punk versus Stone Cold Steve Austin. Man, you go back to 2011, Summer of Punk, or 2012, I can't remember. They had interactions with Jim Ross, and they were promoting the WWE game at the time. And they were like heat magnets to each other, straight edge on one hand, and then you got the beer drinking rattlesnake on the other hand, right? Like, imagine what that would have been like. It would have been incredible. The promos would be through the roof. Like I said, it's just unreasonable to think that we never got that match. You could have had that at SummerSlam. You could have had that at WrestleMania. I think WrestleMania would have been the way to go. It would have been out of this world. GTS versus Stone Cold Stunner, right? And the crazy thing is that if you go back and look at photos from years ago, Punk has been interacting with Steve Austin since he was a teenager, before he was in wrestling, right? So they've got this dynamic, this history with each other. And I'm pretty sure they're good friends behind closed doors, obviously. But man, what an opportunity you almost had. And the thing is, Steve actually came back and had a match 19 years later, after being retired by The Rock at WrestleMania 19, a couple of years ago, back in 2022, he came back and had a match against Kevin Owens at WrestleMania 38 in Texas, which, by the way, Steve put on a hell of a showing. I have to give him that. But just imagine Punk came back 1 year prior to. He came back in 2023, but imagine he came back in 2022 and we might have just had that match. Alas, a missed opportunity. And that's one that I'll have a hard time dealing with for the rest of my life. I know that, because damn. But luckily, fire alarm. Luckily, we live in the world where we can have simulation video games like W2K25 where you can recreate that match. Kind of, you'll never get the aura of the promos and whatnot, but would have been a hell of a match and a missed opportunity. Finally, the last one I want to talk about is kind of like a technical masterpiece that could have been had, and an aerial masterpiece. And these two people have styles that really work, no pun intended. I'm talking about Eddie Guerrero, Latino Heat, versus AJ Styles. That would have been just incredible to watch. Just think about it. The speed of the match, the storytelling of the match, the agility, the aerial ability. Man, it's a fantasy booking. It's something you could have had at the Royal Rumble. Like, think back to Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit in that ladder match from 2001. Incredible, because they know how to work with each other. The chemistry is just untouchable. And that's what these two individuals, fire alarm, could have had. And I got to tell you, it's incredible when you think back to Eddie Guerrero's legacy. This is a man who came from WCW, worked his way up in WWE, got fired, came back, by the way, worked in gymnasiums and did the best he could, came back and became WWE champion and beloved by everybody before he sadly passed away. Then you talk about AJ Styles' legacy, a man who was quite possibly run the independent circuit for 20 years. He's known for everything in Ring of Honor and TNA. He is the man. And finally, when he came in WWE in 2016, blew the roof off the place when he debuted at the Royal Rumble. I still remember Roman Reigns' face, like, whose music is this? But the crowd erupted. And AJ Styles has put on banger after banger after banger since then. In fact, AJ Styles is the guy that retired The Undertaker. Just remember that. The Undertaker personally asked AJ Styles to have his final match with him, the Graveyard match, which was a cinematic masterpiece. But man, just the match these two would have put on. Frog splash, backflips, Pele kicks, forearms, all the good, hard-hitting stuff you would want, fire alarm, you would have gotten from AJ Styles versus Eddie Guerrero. And if it was up to me, he's got to lie, cheat, and steal to get this one, but I'm going to give it to Eddie Guerrero. Now, a couple of honorable mentions I do want to give shout outs to. Just imagine, we never got Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Hulk Hogan. We got The Rock versus Hogan, but that's because Austin and Hogan never saw eye to eye. And, apparently Hogan treated Austin poorly back in the early days of WCW, which I'm not really surprised by. Or Hogan versus John Cena. That would have been incredible too. But alas, we never got that. And maybe even Daniel Bryanson versus Bret the Hitman Hart. What an incredible match that would have been. Now, of course, there's a plethora of other matches that could have happened, and I didn't mention them here. But if you have some matches you think that would have made dream matches that we'll never get the opportunity to see again, put them in the comment section below. I want to hear what those are, and I'm going to shout those out on the next episode for sure. Because, dude, 5 of them are not going to cover everything that's coming off the top of my mind. Now, again, if you like this nerdy wrestling content, besides the podcast, by the way, give us a thumbs up and a like. It really helps the algorithm. Give us a subscribe. It allows more eyes to get onto the product. And that way we can create more content worth watching. Farm. Anyways, it's your boy Romy, RC, from the Old Nerdy Bastards, signing off. I want to say thank you again for joining us. And until next week, peace.